Join our Patreon.
Do you really want to know? We are Mythvision.
Whoa.
Dude, this is good stuff. No, and remember, every 30 minutes I gotta restart it. Oh, welcome to
Tell
the...
me it's good stuff. I know it's good stuff.
Welcome to the Batcave, my friend. We're recording.
Recording. Bob, one of the great points that I think David Fitzgerald makes is that if we run with the minimal Jesus hypothesis, so there was a historical Jesus, there was a guy, but he was a relative nobody. So of course we don't have any contemporaneous mention of him or anything of that nature because he was just a backwoods Galilean nobody. What are the chances that a relative nobody would be deified to, pun intended, biblical proportions? This makes sense with someone like, Julius Caesar or, Caesar Augustus, someone like that. But wouldn't it make better sense on mythicism? I mean, how does this relative nobody become worshipped to such a great extent, placed on such a pedestal to where, within a matter of centuries, he's worshipped all over the Greco-Roman world? What's your response to that?
Well, the way I like to put it is it's as if you had the Superman seminar and they were convinced there had to have been a historical Superman, but you're not going to get people to believe you can leap tall buildings in a single bound and all that. So they chip away at the miraculous feats of Superman, and they keep chipping, and so they finally say, yeah, there was a historical Superman. He was just Clark Kent. Would there be Superman comics that were just about Clark Kent's reporting career? Who would have taken note of the guy? I mean, he might have been known as some news reporters are known, but there's not going to be like a Peter Jennings comic book. There are not going to be movies about the super exploits of Sean Hannity or something like that. And these people are only known because of the modern media. So I think that is ridiculous. They've just evacuated their own theory. There's no reason left. I mean, there are people like who did get huge media attention, like Billy Graham and Oral Roberts, but there's no religion based on them, and there never will be. So what? It's almost like in the movie Harrison Bergeron, where to be egalitarian, the government chooses the next president by picking names out of a phone book. One day you're a janitor and the next you're president of the United States. It's almost that kind of absurdity, and I just think if that's what you want to argue, bring it on. It's one of those things where to explain it is to refute it.
Nice.
You're supposed to giggle. You're supposed to giggle like ha 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 ha, and then we can keep going.
Laugh track.
Oh, that's good.
Laugh track. Something I've observed in my studies, which I find interesting, is the trepidation of some scholars when it comes to either mythicism or comparative religion. For instance, M. David Litwa, I'm not sure if you're aware of him, wrote a great book, Isis Deus, the depiction of Jesus as a Mediterranean god, or something to that effect, where he does go into the striking parallels between the death and resurrection, or death and apotheosis, whatever you want to call it, of Hercules and Asclepius, as well as Romulus, comparing those with Jesus. And yet, in this most recent book on how the Gospels are historicized fiction, or how the Gospels became history or whatever, he attacks Carrier and other mythicists, and one of the points under attack is the comparisons with other dying and rising gods. I've noticed this with Bart Ehrman as well, where, in his introduction to the New Testament, I believe, he does speculate on whether Christianity has some relation to the mystery religions. But then when he's writing Did Jesus Exist? And it's mythicism under fire, he just, this idea is suddenly repugnant. It's, he just draws away from it. Mircea Eliade, if you're reading about the mystery religions in Mircea Eliade, you can't help but conclude that, well, Christianity must just be another one of these. But then when he comes to Christianity, he backs off and says, no, there's no relation. Anyway, I just wondered if you've observed that as well, where they'll do this about face. If they're actually, discussing Christianity, it's given this it's placed on the pedestal and given this place of uniqueness, and they won't go there. I'll let you take it.
Yeah, Jonathan Z. Smith is another one. He says that he tries to kill the baby in the cradle by saying that there were no dying and rising God myths before Christianity, and his arguments, I think, are easily refuted, and I've done it, and so have others. Now, reading what else this guy has written, he was a genius and had command of all of this data, but suddenly he's turned into Josh McDowell. What the heck? The guy that wrote somebody Mettinger, I can't think of his first name. He wrote a book on dying and rising gods where he says there were pre-Christian dying and rising gods, but Jesus wasn't one of them, without really addressing the thing. And it just amazes me that he says that. And of course, it strikes me as kind of like the way the Chinese government censors American movies. The movie companies have to submit the script to the commies and say, is this okay? Which explains why in Doctor Strange, the Ancient One suddenly becomes some sort of a white witch of Irish descent. A female, not a male. Well, in the original, the Ancient One is clearly a Tibetan Buddhist, but the Chinese hate the Tibetans. They don't want there to be a Tibetan hero, and so it's changed to sort of ecumenical, politically correct stuff. And this strikes me as the same way, that they're kowtowing somehow to a readership, or well, I don't know, like I knew somebody, a parishioner of mine years ago, worked for the American Bible Society, and she said that the translation choices tend to be conservative because they want to sell some Bibles. They remember only too well what happened when the RSV was published, I think in 1945. Fundamentalists held public book burnings of the RSV because it relegated the woman caught in adultery passage to the footnotes and the long ending of Mark to the footnotes. And so that in the next edition, they put them back into the text, but with a footnote saying, well, it probably shouldn't be there, but we want to sell some Bibles. It seems to me I don't know what motivates it, though I think that, like I think with Jonathan Z. Smith, it was just ecumenical correctness, because he had written this book, Drudgery Divine, in which the thing where he really dumps on the dying and rising God thing is in Eliade's edited Encyclopedia of Religion. But in Drudgery Divine, he doesn't get so much into that, but he says that the scholarship about the mystery religions and early Christian syncretism was really motivated by Protestants for whom the mystery religions were a sort of a substitute for Catholicism. They were really trying to attack Catholicism for being heavily influenced with the mumbo jumbo and all of that. Liberal Protestants who kind of were reducing Christianity to just basic morality and not supernaturalism. And I think, it seems to me, that's kind of what's going on here. He doesn't want to be perceived as reinforcing the idea that Christianity was borrowed from this and that, because he doesn't want to hurt the feelings of Christians. Though I think he himself is Jewish, is or was, I'm not even sure if he's still around. But a great scholar, but here's this one point, and I think that Litwa may be doing that. I have I mean, I didn't write it, but I'm promised an article for the Journal of Higher Criticism by another scholar who was attacked by Litwa, who was going to show how he misinterpreted and misunderstood things. And he certainly doesn't seem to be... oh yeah, one other one I can't resist. René Girard, who was an incredible genius. He was a sociologist, a psychologist, a literary critic, historian, and he wrote amazingly interesting books like The Scapegoat and Religion and Violence, just mind-blowing. And he shows how very likely religion began as a way of bringing to a halt inter-class or caste hostilities where social order was breaking down and you had to pick out somebody arbitrarily and blame him for it. Oh, this guy must be an evil magician. He's turned us against each other. And if we could just get rid of him, peace will return, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And you commemorate that by lionizing the one who was the sin bearer, a la Isaiah 53. And then he becomes a savior God and so forth. It's just incredibly fascinating. Well, I'm reading through the books, I'm saying, well, it's absolutely obvious that Christianity is the prime candidate for this. But he had converted to Christianity and said, oh no, the Jesus story is the refutation of all of this. Are you out of your mind? Like, what is going on? It's just outrageous special pleading for the home team. So it appears nobody is immune to this. And it doesn't matter what the motivation was. If the Nazi theologians, and God forbid there were such things, if they argue that Jesus wasn't a Jew and they could prove it, I'd accept it even though they were goddamn Nazis. It doesn't mean they had to be, though they're probably wrong, but if that wouldn't stop me. You can't have guilt by association in intellectual matters. And that's what I think we have with these exceptions given.
Good stuff. Next question, if I may. I've heard the accusation that those who work in comparative religion are engaging in interpretatio Christiana by interpreting or describing the pagan myths by partaking of terminology that is explicitly Christian. In other words, we are looking at the pagan myths through a Christianized lens. Sort of like what Ronald Nash argued in The Gospel of the Geese. He said, comparative religionists describe pagan mystic rituals in Christian terms, and then suddenly throw their hands up in shocked amusement that, oh wow, look how Christian it looks. That's what we're charged of, and I have my own thoughts on this, but I wanted to see what your response would be.
Again, that's, I think, a distinction without a difference. You mean to tell me that if the religions of Osiris and Dionysus had sacramental meals of bread and wine because the gods were the embodiment of the wheat and grapes and all that, that's not a sacramental meal? I mean, just describe it and ask yourself what term would fit this. If they had rituals of initiation, why is that not parallel to baptism? And so forth and so on. And especially if you can explain this by what we know of the history and formation of these religions. The best example, which is never quoted here because there's no real reason to believe in influence, would be Pure Land Buddhism, which has a doctrine of salvation by grace through faith in the Savior, Amitabha Buddha. And some people have said, well, there were Christian missionaries to Japan and China that must have stolen it. No, we know quite a bit about this. It's recent enough. We can trace the evolution of this doctrine through the several of the leaders, the patriarchs of the Pure Land tradition, one after the other. We can see the inner logic that led to this. It comes out very much like Calvinism, that we're so sunk in bad karma and live in a degenerate age that it's no longer possible to be enlightened in the present lifetime, as Buddhist lore says was easy to do in the Buddhist day. Why isn't it anymore? Well, it must be, we live in dark times and so forth. So how are we going to ever be enlightened? Well, lucky for us, in the remote past, this king was taught the Dharma and decided to become a bodhisattva, a Buddha in the making, and that through many ages, many reincarnate lifetimes, he accumulated such good karma that it was way more than he needed for salvation. That was true of all the bodhisattvas, and so he arranged it so that anyone calling on his name in faith would be assured of being reincarnated next time in the Pure Land, as they called it, a kind of a millennial paradise in the West. But then how could you be sure you had sufficient faith? And then why didn't everybody do this if it was so easy? And they, step by step, wind up becoming strikingly parallel to Calvinism. Predestination, the whole shebang. And it's not because they said, hey, those Christians have a pretty good idea there. No, you can see how it evolved within the Buddhist system. Is it fanciful to say that it is parallel to Christianity? No. If you deny it, you're obscuring our understanding of it. And so there are other cases, I think, that are just as cogent, closer to home, with the mystery religions and Gnosticism.
Excellent. Yep. I'm right on track with you as far as that goes. A lot of mythicists argue that in Paul's letters, what we have is a celestial figure, not a person who is ever conceived as having walked the earth. One of the things I wonder is, does that necessarily need to be the case with regard to mythicism? Cannot Paul have conceived of Jesus as someone who did walk the earth, cannot Paul have actually been the first or one of the first to historicize what was previously a myth? I personally don't see why we have to get him off the ground into outer space in order to argue for mythicism, unless there's just no denying that that seems to be the case, that he is purely celestial in Paul's letters. What are your thoughts?
Well, again, you can never prove these things one way or the other, but it is so striking that there is no mention of Jesus as a miracle worker, Jesus debating with the scribes, even though scribes are mentioned in 1 Corinthians. That, bring them on, let's have the debate. The scribes, the wise of this world, they ridicule the gospel, but who cares what they think, because it's the power of the Spirit that converts people anyway. Well, nothing about Jesus confuting the scribes. That's surprising. No reference to various big issues that one would think Jesus had settled in advance, like the Gentile mission and so on. That he doesn't even depict Jesus as a teacher, much less a miracle worker. How is that possible? If he knew anything about Jesus, unless he's thinking of the Clark Kent Jesus, but then why would he have, why would he have been interested in such a thing? There are no quotes from Jesus, despite the one thing they are, well, two maybe that they often claim are, that about divorce, and there is a gospel saying about that, don't get divorced, and Paul introduces it by saying, I'm not saying this, the Lord said it, and then later he says about a fine-tuned issue within that, he says, now about this, I have no word of the Lord, but I think I'm trustworthy on the matter, this and that. Does this mean he had a recorded saying of Jesus? It might. But on the other hand, later in the epistle, he says, if anybody thinks that he's a prophet, because he's just talked about prophesying in the congregation, let him remember that what I am writing you is a word from the Lord. And what were people saying who had a word of wisdom or a word of knowledge? What was that? It's very likely, it seems to me, that he's talking about revelations from the heavenly Christ, just like in the book of Revelation. I mean, the apologists going to argue that Jesus in Galilee wrote these 7 letters? Come on, no, of course not. And the other one in 2 Thessalonians, I think, this we say to you by the word of the Lord, then he goes into all the apocalyptic stuff. Did he mean Jesus said that? I don't think so. What he says looks like a highly condensed passage from one of the prophets. He means scripture, not Jesus of Nazareth. And so I just don't see, and the way apologists have to try to get around this, like the worst might be James Dunn. And again, this guy is an incredible New Testament scholar. I've read a bunch of his books, I think highly of his work. But here he says, well, those passages that sound kind of like Jesus, like in Romans chapter 12, do not be overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good, etc. They are quotes from Jesus, but purposely unattributed to, it's like in the Monty Python skit, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, that somehow it's better invoking Jesus not to attribute the saying to Jesus. What are you even talking about? What possible utility could there have been? And if you are forced to that, you might as well just say, okay, I give up. And there's just no other way to explain it that I know of. And to talk about Occam's razor. And so they, all of this makes you wonder, did Paul know about the Jesus figure of the Gospels? Because he sure had a funny way of showing it. And then when he gets into the death of Jesus, who crucified Jesus? Well, it must have been Pontius Pilate, Caiaphas. No. We hear that the archons of this age put him to death. Not knowing what they were doing because they were only sealing their own doom. This sounds so much like the ascension of Isaiah and various other places where Christ appeared on earth in the likeness of the inhabitants of all the different concentric spheres, and so he was able to get past the archons because they didn't know who he was, and then it was too late. I mean, it sounds so much like that. I mean, you could argue, well, maybe he means that the archons, the fallen angels, were the princes behind the thrones, like in Daniel, the prince of Persia and all that stuff. Yeah, it could be, but it doesn't say that, and it sounds so much like this other thing that I think you have to you have to stick with what it says as much as possible and not be tempted to read the Gospels into the epistles. You just can't do that, or you'll never get straight what either one of them is saying. Or Colossians. You don't need to keep the regulations of the law anymore because they were nailed like the titulus above the cross which is already figured. What do you mean they actually had a Torah scroll there on the cross? Well, no. But his death disarmed the principalities and powers. And in the context, he's saying, how did he disarm them? Well, because their weapon used to enslave humanity was the laws. It directed worship to them, not to the ultimate God. And Christ's crucifixion, his disarming of them, was what did the trick. So he could be saying that about an earthly crucifixion, but who crucified him? The principalities and powers. Who's he talking about there? Well, in Ephesians, which not Pauline, of course, maybe none of it is, was at least early, the same terminology is, he says, we fight not against flesh and blood, but against the forces of spiritual wickedness in the heavens. I mean, the outer space crucifixion is by no means implausible. Look at the stuff the book of Revelation depicts happening in the heavens, in the throne room and all that stuff. The crucified Christ is there with the mortal wound. And even the thing in 1 Corinthians, on the night he was handed over, etc., etc. Okay, here's, get out the straitjacket again. But don't we have a scene where there is a feast in heaven in the book of Revelation? Since Paul says that he received this from the Lord, the same terminology as in Galatians 1. My gospel did not come from any human source, nor was I taught it, say by Ananias of Damascus. But I got it directly from the Lord. Well, if that's what this means there, then he may be thinking of some heavenly scene. And it's just not that, I mean, they didn't think of the Platonic heaven where nothing happened. So it just seems to me that, and there are other myths, like the myth of Purusha in the Rig Veda, the primordial man, which is pretty much like the heavenly Adam of Judaism. He sacrificed himself to create all the world and its inhabitants, the different castes, the scriptures and everything, self-sacrifice. I just don't see this as the crazy notion, and those who do, I think, just haven't read enough. I hate to say that.
Patreon.